Good morning, third graders. Our targets for today are: I will explain how the Hopi adapted to their environment and how this environment contributed to their cultural identity. And I will describe some characteristics of the Hopi culture. We're going to review some vocabulary that you will hear in the read aloud. Clans. Clans are groups of families that have the same ancestors. An example would be, my Uncle Wayne always says to my cousins, aunts, and uncles when we get together, clans need to stick together. Deities. Deities are gods and or goddesses. An example would be, the Vikings believed Thor and Loki were deities. Kotsinos. Kotsinos are ancestral spirits in the Hopi religious belief system. An example would be, during the Hopi ceremonial dance, the men often wore masks to represent the various Kotsinos. Solstice. A solstice is either of the 2 times of year when the direct rays of the sun are farthest away from the Earth's equator. An example would be, my favorite day of the year is the summer solstice because it is the day of the year with the most hours of daylight in the northern hemisphere. In a previous lesson, you heard about a group of people who settled in the southwest region of North America called the Ancestral Pueblo. In the southwest, the environment is hot and arid with very little water. This was a big problem for the Ancestral Pueblo, and the lack of water made it very difficult to grow crops. To overcome this challenge, the Ancestral Pueblo irrigated, using channels to bring water to their fields from rivers and streams. The Ancestral Pueblo were not the only group of Native Americans to settle in the hot, dry deserts, mountains, and valleys of the Southwest. Today, we will hear about another group of Native Americans, the Hopi, who also call the Southwest region of America home. After listening to the read aloud, you will be asked to write a complete paragraph comparing and contrasting the cultures of the Hopi people and the Ancestral Pueblo. Remember, comparing and contrasting means telling how things are the same and different. You will be asked to include 3 supporting details and elaboration, with at least one way the cultures of the Hopi people and the Ancestral Pueblo are similar, and at least one way they are different. During the read aloud, you can pause the video at any time to take notes. You may also go back and re-listen to anything you need. You will want to use a piece of paper to take notes as you listen. Set up your lined paper to take notes on the similarities and differences between the Hopi culture and the Ancestral Pueblo culture. Feel free to pause the video now to set up your note sheet. Your purpose for listening. Listen to hear ways in which the Ancestral Pueblo and the Hopi are the same, and ways in which they are different. Drought and confrontation with other native people and with European explorers certainly helped to bring much change to the Ancestral Pueblo settlements that had developed over thousands of years in the American Southwest. The Ancestral Pueblo had developed a way of life that was heavily influenced by the climate and the environment in which they lived. But this is not the end of the Pueblo story. Archaeologists believe that it is probable that the Ancestral Pueblo journeyed to other areas in the region in search of water supplies needed to maintain their crops, hoping for a more peaceful way of life. It is not known for certain why the Ancestral Pueblo left their homes, but it is known for certain that they did leave and journey to other areas in the region. They began to settle in the areas around the Rio Grande River that are now northern New Mexico, northern Arizona, central Utah, and southern Colorado. And so, once again, the native peoples of the Southwest learned how to settle and adapt to their immediate environment, and their culture continued to grow and change. Each year, snow fell, as it still does, on the mountaintops. Rain also fell into the rivers and streams that flowed through the valleys of the lands these native peoples now occupied. However, in arid areas, there was never enough water, and surviving in such places was a never-ending struggle. Despite such struggles, native groups continued to develop new and ingenious ways to manage their most precious resource: water. Over time, the ancestral Pueblo adapted some new customs and beliefs, and they also continued to practice their traditional ways. Out of this grew new customs, languages, religions, and forms of government. These new cultural practices developed in the deserts, mountains, and valleys of the Southwest region. Many tribes came into existence as a result of their ancestors' incredible journey across thousands of years and countless miles. Two of these tribes are the Hopi and the Zuni. These tribes with this shared history are called the ancestral Pueblo. The Hopi, one such tribe born of this journey, is the group that we're going to focus on today. The word Hopi means peaceful or wise. The Hopi are the descendants of the ancestral Pueblo, but interestingly, their language is not the same. The Hopi settled in the area that is now Arizona. They were organized into clans, with the mother side of the family establishing the most important familial connections. Like all native peoples, the Hopi relied on their environment for all of their needs. Similar to the ancestral Pueblo, the Hopi grew beans, squash, and corn. Corn was their most important crop, and they learned to grow several different kinds. Because of the dry conditions, they learned how to plant the corn deep into the ground. There, the corn crop could reach underground water resources and also was protected from the arid conditions above. Also, the Hopi would plant their crops at the bottom of mesas. So, after it rained, the water would run down onto their fields and water their crops. This was different from the ancestral Pueblo, who used a system of channels and irrigation to bring water from rivers and streams to their crops. The Hopi people also planted melons, pumpkins, and cotton at the bottom of mesas. The Hopi lived in houses made of stone and wooden beams. They did not use adobe clay to build houses as their ancestors, the ancestral Pueblo, had. They entered their houses through the ceiling using a ladder. Because of the environment in which they lived, they ate very little meat, but the Hopi women who ran the household knew many different ways to cook corn. Hopi people wove cloth for clothing and blankets and made moccasins, belts, pottery, and jewelry. The Hopi were thought to be a very peaceful people, unlike their ancestors, the ancestral Pueblo. Like many other native peoples, and many people today, however, when they did feel conflict with another person, the way they chose to show this was by giving the silent treatment, or the cold shoulder. The Hopi were also very spiritual. They believed that people were created inside of the earth and emerged onto the surface through an opening, just as their ancestors, the ancestral Pueblo, had believed. The Hopi called this small part of the opening in the ground a sipapu. They practiced what they called the Hopi way. They believed that they should be kind to each other and thoughtful toward their environment. Central to the Hopi's beliefs were the ancestral spirit beings called Kotzinos. These Kotzinos were thought to be the spirits of animals, natural elements such as wind and rain, ancestors who had left the spirit world 6 months each year to dwell among the living, or deities. The Hopis believed that the Kotzinos would visit the world each year around the time of the winter solstice, and they would stay until the time of the summer solstice, about 6 months. The Hopi believed that they needed the most help from the Kotzinos spirits during this time because it was the harshest, coldest time of year. They could not grow crops, and it was more difficult to find animals to hunt. The number of spirits believed to visit varied from community to community. The Hopis believed that the Kotzinos might, for example, bring forth rain so that the earth and the crop would continue to thrive, or that the Kotzinos might provide assistance in times of sickness and disease. In essence, the Hopi believed that in order to survive, they had to ask for help from the spirits that controlled every aspect of their world. The Hopi held festivals and ceremonies through the year, the most important of which was held during the time the Hopis believed that the spirits of the dead dwelt among the living. Ceremonial dances were performed by male members of the tribe. The men wore a variety of masks and special clothes to represent the various Kotzinos. During the ceremonial dances, they asked the gods to bring forth rain to make the crops grow. The Hopi believed that during these ceremonial dances, each man would transform into the spirit that he was representing. Many of these ceremonies were held in the plazas, whereas some were held in the kivas. This was a tradition that had begun with the ancestral Pueblo. Cocinos dolls were important too. They were hand-carved from cottonwood roots by men and presented to boys and girls. Each doll represented a particular spirit. The doll's face revealed what spirit it was. Cocinos dolls were honored and revered as the bringers of rain. For people in such a dry region, rain meant life. The Hopi still inhabit the southwest region of North America and live throughout the United States and around the world. Some live without adhering to or being devoted to their traditional ways, whereas others practice the Hopi way, seek the aid of the Cocinos, and live much the same way as their ancestors did, keeping these traditions. The Hopi, along with the Zuni and many other Native American groups, continue to cherish and manage the land they have lived on for hundreds of years as their tribal journey continues.